Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned when you're doing your researching for these upcoming MMA events. We've eclipsed 3,100 fighter profiles, and if there was any weekend to utilize the service, this weekend is the one. Not only do we have UFC Mexico City coming up, but we also have Cage Warriors 166, LFA 177, A1 Combat 18, Fury FC 86, Risen Landmark 8, PFL versus Bellator Champs, and ACA 171. How are you going to be able to study all of those in a sufficient amount of time? The MMA Fight Archive is right there for you to ensure that you can get direct links to past fights for all of the competitors fighting on those upcoming cards. So make sure you guys check it out. 7-day free trial available. Link for that is in the description below. All right, this week we are covering UFC Mexico City, headlined by a flyweight rematch between former champion Brandon Moreno as he takes on former title challenger Brandon Royval. In the co-main event, we have another rematch, and it is going for 5 rounds as we have Yair Rodriguez going up against Brian Ortega. The interesting thing about both of these matchups is that their first fight both ended via injury. If you guys remember, Brandon Royval suffered a shoulder injury, as did Brian Ortega. Both, I believe, occurred within the first round or so. Very unfortunate ending to those, but luckily we get those fights, and getting 5 rounds of both of them will be very intriguing. Will we need all 5 rounds? We'll see when I break that fight down for you guys, or both those fights down. But still, it's great that we have the option of 5 rounds if that's what we require. Obviously, there's a ton of other Mexican talent filling out the card. A great card overall. 13 fights on tap. And the big storyline going into this one is obviously going to be which fighter prepared for elevation the best, because we've seen some very bad performances in the past from fighters that are normally good cardio-wise. But once they fight in Mexico City, or if they fight in Denver, Colorado, you normally notice that their cardio starts to take a little bit of a hit. So we'll see which fighters have prepared well for that and which fighters have not. Before we get into the breakdowns, a couple of things we always cover at the top of the show. Let's quickly go over the results of the last UFC event. We'll start off with the lock of the night play that we had for UFC 298. It came in the form of Danny Barlow, who cashes at minus 190. Seemed to be in the driver's seat the entire time against Josh Quinlan, and he was able to get the knockout in the 3rd round there. This guy still has a couple mistakes that he needs to shore up as he continues to take steps up in competition, but it was a great performance against Quinlan, where he was able to utilize his range, his speed, and then eventually his power to finally get the finish for us. The dog of the night does not come through, and that was in the form of Brendan Hibero, who we had at plus 125. He closed closer to plus 100 come fight time, and we knew it was going to be a barn burner. It ended up being Ming Yang that was able to get the knockout there in the 1st round. Decent effort from our underdog Hibero, but he was unable to get the job done. And again, this was a favorite heavy night. Every favorite one until the main event, where Ilia Topuria obviously knocked out Alexander Volkanovski, and we had a 2.5 unit play on Volkanovski. It seemed very close in the 1st round. All 3 judges gave it to Volkanovski, but it was ultimately Topuria's ability to crash the pocket, utilizing his winging combinations, and one of those finally landed cleanly on the chin of Volkanovski, knocking him out. So minus 2.5 units there. We also took a 1 unit loss on Jeff Neal at plus 200, who lost via split decision. Now, it doesn't matter if it didn't deserve to be a split decision. I agree that Ian Machado Gary likely should have won that fight on all judges' scorecards. But the fact that we got enough of an effort out of him to get that plus 200 to make it to a split decision, again, whether it's a right decision or not, that means at least one person in the world believed that he won that fight. Maybe we got some value on the plus 200 there, but regardless, at the end of the day, we have to rip up the ticket, minus 1 unit on Jeff Neal there. Let's talk about the other losses first before we get into the wins. Well, there was only 2 other losses, but one of them being Amanda Lemos and Mackenzie Dern going under 2.5 rounds. Lemos almost had her out of there in the 2nd round. I underrated Lemos's submission and grappling defense, as I thought if this fight did hit the mat, Dern would be able to wrap up a submission. That did not come to fruition, but luckily we had money on Amanda Lemos straight up as well, so we pretty much, you could call we ended up losing about a unit 1.03 units on the fight overall, as we only won 1 unit on Amanda Lemos, and I had 2.03 units on the under 2.5 there. The other spot that lost was Anthony Hernandez by submission round 3 for 0.2 units at plus 1100. That lost, but we did manage to get the Anthony Hernandez submission round 2 prop at plus 800. So all in all, we go plus 1.4 units on that spot. That fight going down pretty much how I drew it up. We knew it was going to be close early with Kopylov showcasing solid takedown defense, but Hernandez's ability to eventually get that fight to the ground and sink in that choke, it was just a matter of time as long as his durability held up. Very happy to cash that as well. What else do we got here? Talked about Amanda Lemos. Merab Dvalishvili, 3.5 units at minus 175. He closed closer to minus 300 by fight time. So I was happy to get some solid CLV there. Again, I'm not the best in terms of seeking out line value or CLV just to, if I like a spot enough and I like the odds enough, I'll take a shot on it. And that was the case with Dvalishvili. We cashed for two units there as he puts Henry Cejudo into deep water and drowns him and gets that decision victory. We also had 2 parlays that hit for us. The first of which was for 1.66 units at minus 166. Rinya Nakamura, Marcos Algerio de Lima. I felt like those 2 spots were shoo-ins considering the short notice nature for Junior Tafa. Big win for de Lima there to go out there, take that last minute opponent change. Both guys fight the same anyway, but de Lima goes out there, utilizes his calf kick and gets the win. And then Nakamura, I was concerned about how he would win the fight, but I knew he would win the fight. So I wanted to figure out a way to just make another line just a little bit better by throwing him into it. And that's what I was able to do in the Algerio de Lima fight. And then lastly, we had another parlay that was tied to our KSW event. 1 unit on Miranda Maverick, who cashed with relative ease. Andrea Lee seemed flustered that entire fight. And then I had Victoria Suzuka, and they put together plus 108 cash for 1.08 units as well. KSW was great in the form of pretty much sweeping the entire card with the only loss on that night coming in the lock of the night play. So not happy about that, but I'm glad that I had enough action on the rest of the card that we pretty much erased the loss from the lock of the night play. It was Vasil Dukar. The guy goes out there and lays an egg. He was going up against a guy that had no competition in the last 6 years and was making his MMA debut. And Dukar was unable to get anything off that night. But luckily, Valerio Murcia cashes for us plus 125. Joseph Stumer cashes for us plus 110. Matos Jurassic cashes at minus 125. And Kasper Kozorzebski, who was the dog of the night, cashes at plus 124 as well. So all in all, plus 2 and some change units for the weekend. Happy about that. Back in the green after a unfortunate UFC Vegas 86, I believe it was. But again, back in the green. Very happy about that. All right. Other things. The Lockheed two-step. Absolutely on fire this year. 5-0 so far through the first 5 UFC events of the year. Very happy about that. Again, shout out to everybody that's been supporting that segment that drops every Thursday. I see the views on that going up and up and up as we continue to hit those Lockheed two-steps. Again, if you want to get the Lockheed two-step and Lockheed Trinity before everybody else, I dropped it in on Mondays on the Patreon page, the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Check the link in the description below for that. More often than not, you'll be able to get better odds if you lock it in on Monday rather than Thursday when I drop it for the public, as there probably already is action on the legs that I end up putting in those parlays. So if you want to get early access to those, check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page. And then the Lockheed Trinity cash this past weekend as well. I believe it was plus 247. And we go 3-2 now on the year for the Lockheed Trinity. Last thing I want to plug, GodzillaWins.com. We go out there, drop 2 articles a week. Wednesdays, main event breakdown. Thursdays, 3 best moneyline spots. We went 2-1 this past weekend. I'm doing pretty decent on the 3 best money line articles, so make sure you guys check that out. Link should be in the description below. Otherwise, just go to GodzillaWins.com and check those guys out. Not just for MMA, but they cover all the other big sports as well. So make sure you guys check those guys out and support them as well. All right, we got 13 fights to get through for this UFC Mexico City card, so let's get right into it. First fight up that we got is going to go down in the featherweight division, as we got Eric Silva coming in at plus 225. He goes up against Mohamed Naimov, who comes in at minus 305. We'll start off on the Eric Silva side, who suffered his first UFC defeat, obviously in his UFC debut, as he got grinded out by TJ Brown and eventually finished in the third round of that matchup. Now, it's been over a year since we've seen Eric Silva in action, which is unfortunate considering he turns 37 in a few months here, and he's already 36. He made it to the UFC pretty late. We don't know if he's going to be on his decline at this point in time. Normally, he's a guy that goes out there, looks to smother his opponents on the ground and find early finishes. I believe 4 out of his 5 fights that he had prior to the UFC were all first-round finishes where he gets these guys to the ground very easily, dominates them from on top, and more often than not finds a submission victory. But him getting up there in age, him having a sketchy gas tank as well, especially fighting at elevation. I get it, he trains there, but where was his cardio against TJ Brown, right? Not even fighting at elevation. So that's a little bit of a concern. But gotta wonder what has kept him out for so long, possibly an injury, and will he come back looking as dominant as he had before his first last loss, or is he gonna gas out once again? His opponent this week, Mohamed Naimov, is now 2-0 in the UFC, although both of those wins in the UFC have come with a little bit of, not controversy, but asterisks. The Jamie Mullarkey fight, his UFC debut, goes out there, gets outworked for about 2.5 minutes before he lands a big bomb and knocks out Jamie Mullarkey. His last fight against Nathaniel Wood, did some good work throughout that fight, but, constant groin shots, consequential fence grabs, and the most egregious of them all, as Nathaniel Wood in the last 10 seconds is raining down fight-ending ground and pound that he was landing very precisely and very accurately and with a lot of power. Naimov was grabbing the inside of his glove, which is illegal, to keep him from landing even more damage. One of those shots could have put him out, but he ends up cheating his way to victory. Very unfortunate look for him there, as he is a talented fighter. He's 10-2. He's showing that he has an improving wrestling game, something that he continues to work on throughout this part of his career. He's been training at his homeland of Tajikistan, but has been cross-training over there at Team Elevation as well, which we know has a great training staff, coaching staff, and a lot of good training partners for him as well. Big power in his hands, but kind of his flaw in the past has been his own takedown defense and his cardio down the stretch. Now, I was kind of surprised to see this line as wide as it is. Naimov should win here. Naimov should be the one that goes out there and out-grapples Eric Silva, but it could happen the other way around. Again, Naimov's takedown defense has been sketchy in the past. The cardio is going to be big here, as this could go down as being a grapple-heavy fight between both guys, and one minor slip-up, somebody exerting too much energy early, could render them useless a little bit later on in this fight. So all in all, for me, it is a pass. I do think Naimov will have the wrestling advantage ever so slightly, which will allow him to enjoy dominant positions and likely win this fight on the scorecards. But no way am I betting Naimov at minus 305, a guy that was back-to-back underdogs. I get it. He's going up against Eric Silva, who's not that great of a talent either, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves with Naimov. I get it. He's an OV, so maybe that's why he's getting a lot of action here. He should win this fight, and he will be my prediction by decision. Next up, moving over to the flyweight division, we got Victor Altamirano coming in at plus 250. He goes up against Felipe Dos Santos, who comes in at minus 300. Now, Altamirano is coming off of a loss to Tim Elliott last time around, where Elliott was able to land multiple takedowns and just grind out Altamirano. Altamirano is normally a kicker from distance that likes to maintain his range, utilize high volume from that range, but has also shown an ability to take opponents to the ground and grind them out like he did against Vinicius Salvador. But the biggest flaw and red flag in his game is his takedown defense. He is somewhat active off of his back, and he makes it awkward for his opponents in terms of trying to settle on top or even try to get any damage off from on top, but he gives up too much time off of his back. He is not working effectively enough to get back to his feet, to not make it look so good optically for his opponent if fights were to go to the judges' scorecards, just like it did against Tim Elliott. Now, he landed his own takedown in the second round against Elliott, had some decent control time there, but before we knew it, he was the one ending up on his back and still trying to find a way to stop the damage that was raining down on him from the veteran Tim Elliott. He still has some time to show off some improvements. He's 33 years old, but we know as fighters start to get older at this low weight class, things start to go south for them, right? They start losing the physical traits that made them so successful at flyweight, and they start to fall off. But nothing really shows me that Altamirano is completely dead and gone at this point in time. The guy is very skilled. Again, good kicking game from distance, BJJ black belt, but he really needs to shore up that takedown defense if he hopes to have any further success in the UFC. His opponent, Felipe dos Santos, had one of the best UFC debuts on short notice, even in a loss. He went up against Manal Cap back at UFC 293, I believe it was back in September, and he put on a spirited effort. He lost the first 2 rounds, but he came on strong in the 3rd round, hitting and landing big on Manal Cap before ultimately the time ran out, and Cap got his hand raised by decision. Dos Santos trains out of the Diego Lima Shoot the Box team, known mainly for Charles Oliveira, but he showcases a lot of similarities to Oliveira in the fact that he has a solid Muay Thai aggressive striking style, but also has a very active guard from his back if he is taken down. This guy's very impressive, very aggressive, one of the more funner fighters to watch, and he's only 23 years old. In this matchup specifically, I believe that both guys kind of have similar fighting styles in terms of the fact that they like to kick from distance, and then if they see an opportunity to take the fight to the ground, they can do that, or they're active enough from their back. I think it's going to be the aggressiveness, though, of Dos Santos that will be the difference maker in this fight. I think Dos Santos should be able to keep Altamirano on the defensive for the most part of this fight, and I wouldn't be surprised if Dos Santos is able to drop him a few times as well, considering the slight speed advantage he should hold in this matchup. Again, cardio should play a factor in this matchup, but both guys seem to have good cardio to me. We saw Dos Santos in a pretty high-paced fight last time around, and Altamirano has gone 5 rounds in the past. I do like Dos Santos here, though. I don't mind the chalk on him. His aggressiveness will be the key factor in him winning this matchup. I wouldn't mind seeing him try to take this fight to the ground, but either way, output on the feet or even control from top position, I think Dos Santos wins this fight, and I think he wins it on the scorecards. Next up, sticking with the flyweight division, we have UFC newcomer Luis Rodriguez coming in at -105. He takes on Dennis Bondar, who comes in at -115. Starting off on the Luis Rodriguez side, who's currently riding a 5-fight winning streak after he lost his Contender Series bout back in 2020 to Jerome Rivera. Since that fight, he's gone out there and finished, I believe, 3 or 2 out of the 5 fights that he has currently won. But we know that the level of competition he's been fighting on the regional scene there in Mexico, usually not up to snuff in terms of what he's going to be going up against in the UFC. This guy seems to have some decent power in his hands. Sketchy-ish takedown defense game, but also a assertive takedown offensive game if that's what he tries to approach it with. But I wonder what his skill level will be now that he's going to be taking on UFC level talent. His opponent this weekend, Dennis Bondar, is now winless in the UFC through 2 UFC bouts, although his first fight against Malcolm Gordon was a fight where he lost by injury. His last fight against Carlos Hernandez, he was unable to get the fight to the ground and ultimately succumbed to the better striker that was Carlos Hernandez. But the ending of that fight is the thing that I really want to hone in on here. If you guys remember, Carlos Hernandez landed a beautiful trip that actually caused his head to hit Dennis Bondar's head once they hit the mat, and that knocked Bondar out. And from there, Carlos Hernandez, doing his job, postured up and landed 7 unanswered elbows straight to the head of Dennis Bondar, clearly put him out, and that fight went to a technical decision due to the inadvertent headbutt, but luckily there was so much of the fight that had already transpired that they were able to give a decision, and Hernandez was able to still get his hand raised. But you gotta wonder how much damage Bondar suffered there and what the long-lasting effects of that will be. He's been out of action now for, I believe it's 8 months, so maybe that's enough time for him to have recovered and try to get back into the cage and get back to his winning ways. But there's just too much mystery there in terms of what his durability is going to be like. I believe he is the best wrestler that Luis Rodriguez has gone up against, and I believe that we'll finally see Bondar showcase his wrestling and his ability to control this opponent on the mat. However, Rodriguez has some hands. He has some power. And I just can't help but think that this could be one of those fights where Bondar looks great, but the beginning of the second round or the beginning of the third round, Rodriguez lands a big shot that puts Dennis Bondar clean out. So I'm going to have to lean still with Bondar. I think he has more paths to victory, and I think his wrestling is good enough to nullify Rodriguez. And I don't think that Rodriguez has fought a wrestler and grappler like Bondar in the past. So I'm going to have to go with Bondar here. Very low confidence. I'm going to take Bondar to win this fight by decision. Moving over to the lightweight division, we got Claudio Puelles coming in at plus 175. He goes up against Ziam, who comes in at minus 205. Now, Claudio Puelles suffered his second UFC defeat last time around as he got his shit kicked in. I'm just going to put it out there plainly. He got his shit kicked in by Dan Hooker. Now, we know what Puelles' game is. He has a kicking style from distance, but it's really his ability to get fights to the mat and get a knee bar. I believe he holds a record right now in the UFC for most knee bar victories, and that's his bread and butter. Like Ronda Rousey or Yulia Stoliarenko loves snatching up arm bars. He loves snatching up knee bars. And he can do it from almost any position, right? He loves rolling for knee bars. If his opponent has his back, he will obviously jump to guard or at least roll to get that knee or that leg and try to crank on it to get the win, just like he did against Clay Guida and Chris Gritzmacher. But on the feet, if his opponent is technically better than him, he's usually a sitting duck in that realm. And that's what he's facing this weekend against Ziam. Ziam is a talented French kickboxer, and we see him currently on a 2-fight winning streak, picking up the biggest win of his career last time around against talented striker Jai Herbert. Ziam is a guy that is continuously getting better, and at only 26 years old, seems to have a lot of potential left in him. This guy utilizes combinations from distance, utilizes great kicks and good footwork so that he can keep fights in the distance that he requires so that he can get off on his striking. We know that he has a little bit of issues in terms of the grappling when fights hit the mat, but he has improved his takedown defense, so we should give him that. And that's where my concern in this fight lays for him. If Puelles is somehow successful with snatching onto a knee bar or getting this fight into the grappling realm, how much shit is Ziam in? It could be a whole lot of shit. It could be so much shit that I'll be pissed at myself for taking minus 205 on Ziam. On the feet, he'll look probably minus 500. Don't get me wrong. But Puelles is a guy that's going to continuously work until he's not able to work anymore. If you guys remember his fight with Felipe Silva, most of you guys probably weren't even UFC fans at that time, but Felipe Silva was a nasty kickboxer, similar to Dan Hooker, and he was beating the shit out of Claudio Puelles for about 2.5 rounds until Puelles was able to jump for a knee bar and he was able to secure it and get the tap. This could be one of those spots, right? Ziam's not much of a power puncher. Last 5 fights, he's not been able to get a knockout. He is a volume puncher. He's accurate with his shots, but I don't know if he's going to be able to knock Puelles out unless it's an accumulation of shots and it's a spot where Puelles has kind of just exhausted his options, start to gas out, elevation again coming into play here, and he ends up just wilting over, and we see Ziam possibly get a TKO there. But we know Puelles is going to just keep trying and trying and trying. This is a pass for me, but I'm going to take Ziam here. I think he plays it safe enough that he doesn't get wrapped up in anything, and he goes on to win a decision here. All right, next up, flyweights, a rematch of a fight that went to a no contest last time around. We got Edgar Chairez coming in at minus 330. He takes on Daniel Lacerda, who comes in at plus 255. We'll start off on the Edgar Chairez side here. Again, well, we can talk about this for both guys. They fought each other last time around a couple months back, and it was a Darce choke, I believe, that Edgar Chairez had locked up very deep on Daniel Lacerda. Unfortunately, the referee steps in, stops the fight, and luckily for Lacerda, does not take his 5th loss in a row, but ultimately gets that fight called as a no contest, as the referee had admitted to wrongdoing in that spot and stopped the fight when he shouldn't have. Now, I wish it would get revised to the point, the rules that is, that they would revise the rules enough to the point that if something like this occurs, let them keep fighting. Put them in a neutral position or something like that. Let them keep fighting rather than having them making them waste several more months of their career trying to come back and have this fight again. It's weird, but is what it is. Edgar Chairez, nasty striker, has a nasty choke game as well, as we've been seeing as of late. His UFC debut was a short notice spot against Tetsuro Taira, in which he got choked out himself, he had some decent success of his own, but it was just minor mistakes that he was making that cost him that fight. If you guys remember, he was really touching up Taira on the feet, and then whenever Taira would go for a takedown, Chairez would latch onto a guillotine and hope that would be enough for him to get the tap or put Taira out. But that's what all Taira wanted. Taira knows what he's doing on the mat. So once the fight hit the mat, he's like, all right, I'm going to let this guy gas his arms out and then eventually get out of those positions, get to my work on the ground as I'm known to do. So Chairez was close to winning that Taira fight had he not made those small little mistakes. On the flip side for Lacerda, it's been nothing but losses since he made his debut in 2021. But the guy goes out there and he fights his ass off. Usually the UFC cuts people after 3 straight losses. For sure, they cut them after 4 straight losses. They're giving Lacerda a 5th chance here because they respect the fact that this guy goes out on his shield every single time. The CJ Vergara fight, the guy had Vergara nearly defeated and finished in that first round until he gassed himself out trying to finish him, and then Vergara was able to get the finish in the second round. Lacerda is an all-action type of guy, but something that he showcased in his fight against Chairez was he might take his time here. He might look to utilize his grappling and try to utilize his jiu-jitsu and possibly try to get it finished in a more methodical sense. But he's fighting at elevation here. And I think he will eventually revert back to trying to go balls to the wall and try to get the finish. I suspect Chairez will be able to take all of that early action from Lacerda, take over, have the better cardio, and eventually find his own finish, probably in the second round. Something that I'm privy to do is take the under 1.5 in Lacerda fights. They pretty much hit every single time except the Vergara fight, and we're getting heavy chalk once again. But I think he showed his hand that he wants to slow things down this time. So I won't be taking the chalk, although this fight could still end up finishing under 1.5 rounds. I'm still going to take Chairez here, and I think he probably gets it done second or third round, submission or TKO, doesn't matter. I'll probably just play those round props straight up for Chairez as well and hope to cash in on some plus money there. All right, sticking with the flyweights, we're going to go with Jesus Aguilar, comes in at plus 120. He goes up against Matias Mendonca, who comes in at minus 140. Seems like it's Mexico versus Brazil for a lot of these fights is what I'm getting at. But we'll start off on the Aguilar side, who had a 17-second knockout victory over Shannon Ross in his last fight. That was his first UFC win, as his UFC debut came up against Tatsuro Taira, who was able to sink in the choke and get the finish in that fight. Aguilar, solid fighter in the fact that he's short, stocky, and throws with a ton of power, just as we saw in the Shannon Ross fight. But he's capable of going out there and grinding opponents out with his grappling as well. He's very strong when he gets a hold of his opponents and drags them to the ground and does great work there. He postures up, gets some good shots off, and usually is able to keep fights on the ground rather than just getting a stalemate and being stood up by the referee. He throws heavy shots in his punches, which allows him to close the distance because he's usually the shorter guy in a lot of his fights. At 5'4" with a 62-inch reach, usually the shorter guy. He's definitely the shorter guy in this matchup, but he closes the distance with such power, such explosiveness, and such speed that opponents find it hard to get a beat on how he's going to be approaching them. But he has power, good grappling, and a nasty guillotine as well if opponents look to shoot desperation takedowns on him. His opponent this weekend, Matias Mendonca, is on a 2-fight losing streak. 0-2 since entering the UFC after a beautiful finish on the Contender Series, I believe back in 2021 or 2022, but it was very impressive what he did on the regional scene. Came in as a 10-0 prospect and then took the fight against Javid Bashra where he got completely outworked, outgrappled, outstruck. He had no answer in that matchup. Normally, Mendonca is a guy that goes out there and utilizes his speed, power, and explosiveness with his technical Muay Thai striking, and that's usually allowing him to go out there and finish opponents early or set up club and sub opportunities for him to utilize his aggressive BJJ approach. He tried using his aggressive jiu-jitsu last time around against Nate Maness as he continuously leapt for or dropped for a leg lock or any type of heel hook, but Maness was very well versed in the defense there and was able to stop all those while damaging the body of Mendonca, slowing him down and eventually posturing up and TKOing him near the ending of that first round. Mendonca is a guy, in my opinion, similar to Lacerda, not as bad as Lacerda in terms of his gas tank, but a guy that clearly slows down in terms of effectiveness as fights start to get into deeper water. Now, in this matchup against Jesus Aguilar, Mendonca would be smart to try to keep this at range, utilize his speed and his Muay Thai to pick apart Aguilar from distance. Or if he wants to take this fight to the ground, if he can get to better dominant positions in terms of getting the back of Aguilar or getting full mount, getting half guard, getting side control, those are the spots that would favor him much more than looking to go for leg locks or looking for knee bars or anything like that. I think Aguilar is too well versed to get caught in something like that, which is why I actually lean Aguilar here. I think Aguilar has the pace and pressure style to keep Mendonca on the back foot. If he starts digging to the body, he can start to slow Mendonca down and eventually open up a knockout opportunity for him. I believe this is one of those spots where it might look ugly for Aguilar early, but I think Mendonca is going to be unable to secure a finish early, which will open up plenty of finishing opportunities for Aguilar in deeper waters. So I'm going to be targeting Aguilar round 2, round 3, targeting him straight up as an underdog at plus 120. Yeah, I think this is a great spot for him to go out there and defeat a gassy Matias Mendonca. All right, moving over to the bantamweight division, we got Christian Quinonez coming in at plus 145, going up against one of my favorite fighters, Raoni Barcelos, who comes in at minus 170. We'll start off on the Quinonez side, who suffered his first UFC defeat last time around, where he got a little bit too overzealous against veteran Kyung Ho Kang. That was a fight where Quinonez utilized an aggressive striking approach, hurt Kang on numerous occasions, but Kang was able to bite down on his mouthpiece, counter effectively, hurt Quinonez badly, and then follow up a submission to get the victory that night. Quinonez is still young, 27 years old, and I'm sure he will learn a lot from that matchup, considering how close he was to victory and then having it snatched away because he got a little bit too aggressive. Now, if he continues to develop and he showcases a little bit more discipline, this guy could be a star. This guy could be very successful, especially in this bantamweight division where his striking style is very effective. He utilizes a lot of movement, a lot of different combination striking, and he has a decent ground game if that's something that he chooses to approach it with, but it's really a striking that allows him to get his hand raised. He has 22 fights at 27 years old. That's tremendous. And he had some decent opponents on his record as well. His opponent this weekend, Raoni Barcelos, was one of the best top prospects, in my opinion, a couple years back. And even when he was in his 30s, I still considered him a prospect because he just wasn't that active, and the guys he was fighting wasn't really getting him to the rankings where I thought he deserved to be. Now, in 2024, he is 1-4 in his last 5 fights. He's a couple of months away from turning 37, probably getting to the close to the end of the road for him. His one win was against Trevin Jones, where he was able to utilize his wrestling and his patented kickboxing style to keep Trevin Jones from getting off much of his own success. But then his last 2 fights got knocked out by Umar Nurmagomedov very badly, and then got outworked by Kyler Phillips through the first 2 rounds and was unable to keep up with him. It was the constant movement, the speed, the range striking from Phillips that got him the edge over Barcelos that night. And that's where I think that it's going to be tough for Barcelos to get off on much success here against Quinonez. If Quinonez shows more discipline than he did in his last matchup, he should be able to keep Barcelos at range. These guys are pretty much the same in terms of their metrics, height and reach, with Barcelos having a 2-inch reach advantage. But I think if Quinonez utilizes his speed, tries to check some of the leg kicks that are inevitably going to come his way, he should be able to touch up Barcelos pretty good with his speed advantage. Barcelos needs opponents to be content with him in the pocket for him to have success. You know, we saw guys like Victor Henry and Kyler Phillips have success against Barcelos because Barcelos couldn't get them in the pocket to trade with them. Before he could respond or return any of his shots, the guys were out of the pocket. You know, they got their 1, 2, 3 shots off and then they were out. Barcelos was just too slow to catch them. Quinonez could have that advantage too. And at plus 145, maybe worth a little bit of a shot, but I get this queasy feeling in my stomach to take a shot on Quinonez and fade my guy, Barcelos. This might be a fight where I just end up passing it as a whole. If we get some action on Barcelos or we get Quinonez at ridiculous numbers, then maybe I'll be forced at that point. But I'm going to predict Quinonez here. I think he hits the better shots off, land some leg kicks from distance, land some 1-2s down the pipe, and then get out of the way before Barcelos is able to counter him. But then it comes down to the wrestling. Barcelos has a technical wrestling advantage in this matchup, but I think Quinonez's youth and his own improvements in the grappling realm should allow him to refrain from getting controlled too much from that top position by Barcelos, but also be able to work back to his feet, stop takedowns, whatever it is. I'm going to give Quinonez the edge here. And as a dog, not a bad shot. I just need a little bit better of a price to part ways with my money to get that shot. But I'm going to go Quinonez and Quinonez by decision. Moving over to a lightweight banger that we have on tap here, we got Manuel Torres coming in at minus 125 and Chris Duncan coming in at plus 105. Now, I taped this fight a couple days back and it was minus 110 both ways. But now with everybody's sights starting to get set on UFC Mexico City with UFC 298 now in our rearview mirror, it seems like the Torres lovers are coming back out here and showcasing that we believe in his early finishing abilities, and that should be able to come through once again against the guy in Chris Duncan, who we saw get flatlined by Vyacheslav Borshev a couple years back. Now, Torres is a notorious first-round finisher. This guy goes out there, lands heavy strikes. The nasty elbow that he landed against Nicholas Mota last time around, Beautiful, 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 beautiful. One of the best highlights of 2023. But this guy is flawed. This guy is absolutely flawed. He overthrows so many times. He overthrows to the point that he puts himself off balance. He overthrows so much that he starts to slow down. But luckily for him, the guys that he's been finishing had a little bit of durability issues. Frank Camacho, Nicholas Mota. The Colton England fight was a huge asterisk, considering that England had felt that he was poked in the eye and he was complaining about it. The referee didn't stop the fight, and Torres just took advantage of it and put him out cleanly. There's a lot of mistakes that Torres makes, but his knockout power allows him to get away with it early in fights. But we know we saw it with Joe Pyfer a couple of weeks back. At a certain point, they're eventually going to fight somebody that is technically better than them. Fighters that have a better control of their cardio, a better ability to stop and not get knocked out, and then eventually turn the tables and have success of their own. Chris Duncan is a guy that has been showing crazy improvements since joining the UFC, since joining American Top Team. And yes, he has been knocked out in the past, but he took some big shots from a big puncher like Yanel Ashmouz and had his way with him. Omar Morales, not a huge puncher, but ate some shots from him, got his hand raised in that matchup. We're seeing an immaturity in Chris Duncan's game. It's his ability to mix his striking, which is his bread and butter, and hiding takedown attempts behind those strikes. And that's going to be key for him here. He's going to have to wear on Manuel Torres, who will slow down. I absolutely believe by the 4th minute of this fight, if Torres goes out there and fights how he normally does, which is swinging for the rafters and trying to knock his opponent's head into orbit, he will slow down. And if Duncan is smart enough, utilizes good footwork, utilizes the clinch, utilizes takedowns, he should be able to slow down Torres and eventually get his own finish. I like Duncan here. I know there's going to be more action coming in on Torres throughout the week. So I'm just going to sit back and see how high we can get that Chris Duncan number and then take a shot on him. I'll be taking his round 2 and round 3 props. I'll obviously be taking him straight up as well. But Duncan is the better fighter. By far, the better fighter. You take the better fighter at all times. Knockouts are going to happen. It's inevitable. It's MMA. They're fighting with 4-ounce gloves. It's going to happen. But we know Duncan is the better fighter here. As long as he can stay conscious early, he should be able to take over and get the finish in the 2nd and 3rd round. All right, moving over to the strawweight division, we got heavy favorite Yasmin Jauregui coming in at minus 475. She takes on Sam Hughes, who comes in at plus 375. Now, we'll start off on the Jauregui side, who suffered her first professional defeat last time around, where she got knocked out by Denise Gomez in about 20 seconds. It was a very unfortunate loss for her. This was a fighter that had a perfect record up until that point. She normally utilizes her distance striking style combinations, good kicker, not the biggest power, but she does a good job in terms of just keeping opponents at bay with the consistency in which she throws her strikes. But when she faced a power puncher like Gomez, she went down. Say what you want about the stoppage. Jauregui got hit. She got put out. Not a good look. She's talented. She's young still, 24 years old. She definitely still has a lot of improvements to be making and continues to get better get closer to what her potential is. And a lot of people, including myself, believe she has a very high potential. It's good to see her training with the camp that she's with. The Diego Lopez's, the Jesus Aguilars, those guys over there. I look forward to seeing how she looks to bounce back after suffering such a rough defeat, especially with that being her first defeat. Now she's going up against Sam Hughes, who's coming off an upset victory over Jacqueline Amarim last time around, where she was able to survive the early onslaught of Amarim with the BJJ black belt in the first round, but in the 2nd and 3rd round, she was able to stop the takedowns and get off on her own strikes. Now Sam Hughes is a fighter, I believe since I want to say Piera Rodriguez fight or even the Elise Reed fight. This is a fighter that joined forces with Fortis MMA, who has one of the top coaches that we've seen in the game in Save Sayoud. And that's the perfect camp for a fighter like Hughes to go with. She has the physical capabilities. She has the cardio. She has the grind. Now, to match it up with a coach that is able to devise a solid game plan for her, this is a winnable fight, is what I'm trying to get at. She's going to have a 2-inch height advantage She'll be the bigger fighter here, and we know what her style is. She wants to put fighters through the ringer. She wants to grind on them. She wants to break them down and eventually finish them late. And I think we're seeing those improvements from her now. Now that she has a couple training camps under the Fortis MMA banner, this is a fight that she can go out there and pull off another big upset like she did in her last fight. Jauregui is the technically better fighter here. But what good is technical striking and that advantage if you're unable to stay at distance where you find yourself most comfortable? Hughes will be pressured, in my opinion, to try to get this fight to the ground or get it up against the cage where Jauregui is uncomfortable and then get this fight to the ground where she could have success. I get it, Jauregui's good, but minus 475 good? No, not at all. She was losing the first round against Estela Nunes before Nunes blew her wad just as she normally does and then got finished in the second round. Yasmin Lucin was still very young and was just making her UFC debut, and we know she's turning into a solid prospect herself, but that was a bad stylistic matchup for her. Sam Hughes is capable of making this a fight. Plus 375, give me Sam Page. I think she grinds this fight out. I think she gets the decision victory. Hate on me on all you want in the comment section below, but to take a minus 475 fighter who's relatively unproven against a grinder like Sam Hughes is nonsensical in my opinion. I'm taking a shot on Sam Hughes here, maybe even sprinkling her to win by decision, but I think she wins this fight regardless. All right, moving on to the next fight in the bantamweight division, we got Raul Rosas Jr. coming in at minus 260, going up against Ricky Turcios, who comes in at plus 220. Now, Rosas Jr. last time around was able to bounce back from the first loss of his career by picking up a dominant sub 1 minute victory over Terrence Mitchell. That was a fight that he quickly got to the ground and smashed his opponent on top for a TKO victory. We know what this 19-year-old is good at. This kid is a high-level jiu-jitsu player. He gets opponents to the ground, he smothers them, opens up submission opportunities or TKO opportunities, and gets the win. He faced his toughest test of day 2 fights ago in Christian Rodriguez, who is a guy that is a potential champion moving forward if he can get his weight cutting under control. So that's not a bad loss by any means. But Raul Rosas Jr. is a guy that was known for what he was able to do in the gym as a 17-year-old against high-level fighters. I get it. You know, what you do in the training room is not the results that matter when it really comes down to it when you get locked in the octagon in live action. But this guy is still capable of high-level performances. Now, he's going up against Ricky Turcios, who's coming off of a very close split decision victory over Kevin Natividad last time around. Turcios is one of the most wild, unorthodox, and unknown fighters, right? Like this guy's very active, high activity, high output, a lot of empty output as well. You know, you might throw 200 plus significant strikes, but only land 11% of them like he did against Ayman Zahabi. In the grappling realm, he's a BJJ black belt, does a great job with his scrambles. Not often do you find him getting grinded down in certain positions. We saw Natividad do good work in that second round, but you know, for how long was he able to establish that top position before Turcios was able to reverse it or get back to his feet or even get on top like he was able to do in certain spots there? But in this fight, I think Rosas has the better pure jiu-jitsu, or at least better pure grappling. His ability to maintain position will be the difference maker here. Minus 260 is still too wide for me to take on a 19-year-old who's going up against a 30-year-old who has 15 fights of legitimate experience against solid opponents. But what I'm looking at here is probably the over 2.5, which currently sits at minus 125. I think that this will be a back and forth grappling matchup. And as long as the elevation doesn't play too highly on either side here, with one guy eventually gassing out and giving up a submission, or as long as Rosas, you know, he doesn't gas too much going into deep waters here against somebody as active as Turcios, I see this fight going to the scorecards. And you're giving me near pick'em for that. So I'm going to lean Rosas here to win by decision, but the over 2.5 around minus 125, no worse than minus 130 is likely what I'll end up taking a shot on. But I do like Rosas Jr. here, and I think he gets the better positions, better control time, and ends up getting his hand raised on the scorecards. But minus 260 is just a little bit too wide for me. All right, next up, we got another solid prospect here, 24-year-old Daniel Zellhuber, coming in at minus 270 in this lightweight matchup, going up against Francisco Prado, who comes in at 21 years old as a plus 230 underdog. Start off on the Zellhuber side, who currently has a 2-fight winning streak going last time around, sinking in an anaconda choke against Christos Giagos. Now, that fight did not come without some adversity, as Giagos was able to land a big shot in that first round that wobbled Zellhuber. Didn't drop him, but wobbled him, and Zellhuber was able to quickly get his feet back under him, but was unable to secure that round. Luckily for him, in the second round, we could sense that Giagos was starting to slow down, and he was able to start picking him apart with a range advantage and distance advantage that he held, and eventually sinking in a choke after Giagos went for a desperation takedown. Zellhuber is improving tremendously. Under the guidance of the Extreme Couture guys, we can see his improvements and his fight IQ starting to rise every single time out. He was a little bit too gun-shy in his UFC debut against Trey Ogden, and he fell behind on the scorecards because of that. But now that we're seeing him assert himself a little bit more against a veteran like Lando Veneta, and then against somebody that put him in trouble early in their fight against Christos Giagos, you can tell that this guy is improving at an extreme rate. He's very good in terms of keeping opponents at bay, utilizing his reach, utilizing his kicks up the middle, and accentuating that 6'1" height that he has, and that 77-inch reach that he has as well. He should be able to keep his opponents at bay, as that's usually when he has his most success. And this kid's very talented, very promising as well. His opponent this weekend, Francisco Prado, is coming off of a knockout victory over Otman Azaitar. And that was a fight where they pretty much threw down. We saw Zaitar have a little bit of success. We saw Prado obviously eventually land that spinning back elbow that dropped Otman. And we saw, one of my graphics was wrong here, so I was just trying to make sure that it was fixed before I give you guys some false information. But Prado was able to drop Zaitar at the ending of that first round and then posture up with some big ground and pound to eventually get that TKO victory. This kid's young. 21 years old, immersing himself with the goat shed down there in Florida. Lost his UFC debut against Jamie Mullarkey, showcasing that if he's unable to put opponents away early, things could get sticky for him down the stretch, as he doesn't have much else other than, the power punching when he's able to get opponents to exchange with him inside the pocket. His wrestling slowly improving, but still not to the level that I think it's going to have an immediate effect in his upcoming matchups. And I think that's going to be the difference maker here against Zellhuber. I think Zellhuber will do a good enough job in terms of maintaining his footwork and his speed and his range. He'll have a 8-inch reach advantage in this matchup. If he continues to stick that jab out there and that kick out there, it should continue to make Prado whiff at air, and that will start to slow the youngster down, and that will allow Zellhuber to start picking up the pace, start landing more combinations with a little bit more confidence, and maybe even ends up allowing him to get the knockout victory here. But I think it's going to be important that he plays it very safe in the early going. Play it safe, but also make Prado work in the sense of, throw the jab out there, throw the kick out there, let Prado throw, and then return almost immediately. Prado is very much reliant on that early finish in this matchup. I don't think that he has the process to close the pocket as effectively as other fighters have been able to. And again, Giagos was able to hurt Zellhuber. Don't get me wrong. Prado could do that as well. But if Zellhuber has continued to improve his footwork, continue to improve his fight IQ, his striking defense, he should be fine here. This is a spot where I feel kind of comfortable on the chalky spot on Zellhuber. Survive that first round. If you get too queasy, maybe take a live entry on Zellhuber going into round 2. But I feel like this is a spot he should be able to go out there, touch up Prado, and eventually win this fight on the scorecards. All right, co-main event time. Reminder, this one is a 5-rounder as well. We got Yair Rodriguez coming in at minus 185, going up against Brian Ortega, who comes in at plus 160. Now, the first time these guys met was in July of 2022, and it was a fight where we saw Rodriguez keep the fight standing for the most part, stop the initial takedowns of Brian Ortega, and absolutely touch him up on the feet. Ortega landed a couple jabs that actually did manage to get some damage on Rodriguez's face, but it was a late takedown that Ortega landed that got him caught in an armbar attempt from Yair Rodriguez, which ultimately dislocated the shoulder of Ortega and ultimately put Ortega on the shelf and has yet to compete since the last matchup against Rodriguez. In the meantime, Rodriguez was able to get an interim title shot against Josh Emmett, with which he came through with and won in the second round with a submission. And then he tried unifying the titles against Alexander Volkanovski in July and came up short there. Now he has some unfinished business with Brian Ortega, as I'm sure he didn't want that victory by injury and he wants something a little bit more clear. Now, Rodriguez is one of those guys that has had a roller coaster run since he originally burst onto the UFC scene as a fan favorite. People loved his flashy style, his explosive striking, the power that he brought to the table, his flying, spinning shit. It was tremendous. But after he lost to Frankie Edgar, things started to go downhill for him, right? There was those numerous bookings that he had against the beat Magomed Sharipov that didn't come to fruition. A lot of people were blaming him. The UFC even cut him because of his refusal to fight a certain fighter. They eventually brought him back. But I think since the Max Holloway fight, people have gained another respect for him, or more respect for him. He comes out there and he throws down. He is no longer a fighter that will be broken. He's a fighter that goes out there and tries to get the knockout and tries to win every moment that he can. The Chan Sung Jung fight, perfect example. He's probably down on the scorecards in that fight and pulls off a tremendous back elbow knockout at the buzzer and gets a knockout victory. Rodriguez is a very solid fighter and improving too. We know he's a striker, but his wrestling is improving and his aggressive jiu-jitsu game off of his back is improving, as we saw in the Ortega fight and as we saw in the Josh Emmett fight. Now Ortega. We know what he is good at and what he's not so good at. His striking seemed to have been much improved when he fought Chan Sung Jung, but from what I had heard was after Brian Ortega rocked Chan Sung Jung badly, I believe, in the first or second round, Jung never got his feet back under him. Jung was never in there mentally. He was asking, is it the second round coming up when they're going into the fifth round? Things like that. So I'll chalk that up to, we'll still give Ortega the credit for landing that in the first place and being able to maintain his success throughout the rest of that fight just off of his striking. But as we saw in the Volkanovski fight, as we saw in the Rodriguez fight, he's still a sitting duck against technically better strikers. And that could end up being the case here against Rodriguez once again. Now, Ortega did land the takedown at the ending of that first round, which is, what ended up causing the finishing sequence there. So who knows how it looks moving forward? Will that submission that Rodriguez threw up, would that have created a get-up opportunity for Rodriguez to just get back to his handiwork, or would that have given up into a position that Ortega could latch onto and pull off a submission? That's the big question here. But I feel from what we've seen good enough takedown defense from Rodriguez that if he's able to keep this fight at range, utilizes distance striking, he should be able to find that finish over Ortega here. I don't think that this is a fight that's going to require those extra 2 rounds. I think that this is a fight where we'll see Rodriguez get that second or third round victory. It's going to be important that he keeps this fight standing. I get it. His jiu-jitsu off his back is very much improved, but Ortega is deadly with his BJJ. But I feel confident enough that at a minus 185 clip, Rodriguez keeps this fight upright and eventually gets that finish in the second or third round. All right, main event time. Flyweight rematch. We got Brandon Moreno coming in at minus 255, going up against Brandon Royval, who comes in at plus 215. Now, these guys met back in 2020, where Brandon Moreno was able to get the victory after Brandon Royval ultimately dislocated his shoulder in the dying seconds of that first round and ultimately had to get TKO'd because of it. Now, I think Moreno showed his hand in that fight in the 4 minutes that it did take place, that he wanted to take a grapple-heavy approach to try to subdue Royval. Obviously, Moreno has improved his striking tremendously, but given the chaotic nature in which Brandon Royval throws, I think Moreno felt a little bit more comfortable on the mat where he could control the very jittery style of Royval. Moreno obviously lost his title in his last matchup against Alexandre Pantoja, as Pantoja was able to secure a few key moments with his control and getting the back of Moreno. But I think Moreno is still capable of championship-level fights, championship-level performances, and getting that championship back once again. And I think it starts this weekend with Brandon Royval. Moreno, like I said, very much improved his striking. His jiu-jitsu game is very much up there as well. His takedowns, high level as well. And he's going up against Royval, who's, again, a very fun fighter. One of my favorite flyweights of all time, just because of how chaotic in nature he is when he steps in the cage. He throws such wild techniques, from spinning stuff to flying stuff to knees up the middle, unorthodox striking. Nothing that really follows the technical playbook of anything, but still is successful enough that he can go out there and win go on a 3-fight winning streak to earn himself a title shot like he did last time around. Unfortunately, grappling and pure jiu-jitsu ended up being the downfall of Brandon Royval, as I expected to be once again with Brandon Moreno. Royval will try to knock out Moreno here. He'll try to catch him in some sort of flying submission, but I think Moreno is too technical and too disciplined to get caught in anything like that. I think we'll see Moreno once again utilize his grapple-heavy approach, try to get these dominant positions, maybe try to get the back of Royval, similar to what Pantoja was able to do, and just ride him out. I think Royval may end up making some mistakes down the stretch, which Moreno might be able to take advantage of. Pantoja, he was life or death just trying to hold on to position. But we know he has a bit of a cardio issue. Moreno can go a hard 5 rounds if he needs to. And I think if Royval tries to make these unorthodox movements late in a matchup, Moreno is a guy that could latch onto a submission and make him pay for it. I like Moreno here, man. I think he's just technically too much for Royval. Royval's chaotic nature might make him live to pull off a Hail Mary knockout or something like that. But I think that we'll see Moreno keep him static, keep him on the mat, keep him in a spot that he's unable to get off on his wackiness and unorthodox nature. So I'm going to go with Moreno here. I think he wins it on the scorecards. I might sprinkle the submission prop if it's good enough, but I think for the most part, we see this go 5 rounds, and I think a lot of it has to do with Moreno just controlling this fight and getting the better of Royval with a lot of control time. And there we go. Brandon Moreno by decision, possibly submission. There you guys go. 13 fights broken down for you guys in just under an hour. Appreciate it if you guys watched the entire thing through. Remember, we got a ton of other great content coming this week. I will be doing a MMA Lawcast episode for PFL versus Bellator, so stay tuned for that later in the week. And then I got 3 regional shows that I'll be breaking down on the Patreon page. ACA, Cage Warriors, and LFA. All of those will be on the Patreon in written form, so make sure if you guys want action on those, you guys can check that out in the link in the description below. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again tomorrow for the top 3 lock of the night plays or candidates. Wednesday, top 3 dog of the night candidates. Thursday, quick picks plus Lucky Trinity. Again, if you want early access to the Lucky Trinity, which is 5-0 on the year so far, check the link in the description below for the lock of the night page where I drop it on Mondays. And then Friday, 3 best prop bets. A ton of content coming this week for you guys, folks. I'm going to be working my ass off. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Hopefully you guys appreciate it. Drop a like and subscribe. Drop a comment below just for the heck of it. Appreciate you guys. Love you guys. I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Peace.